If being alone no longer scares you, this video is not a coincidence. There is a silent shift that happens when the mind grows stronger. You stop craving constant company. You stop explaining yourself. You stop feeling empty in silence. And instead of loneliness, you begin to feel clarity. Buddhism teaches that this moment is not loss, it is awakening. When you learn to enjoy your own company, you stop living from fear and start living from inner stability. Today, you will understand why strong minds learn to walk alone and why this quiet choice becomes the foundation of unbreakable peace. 1. Solitude is where the mind finally speaks truthfully. Buddhism teaches that much of our suffering is not caused by life itself, but by our constant need to escape from our own minds. We keep ourselves busy with noise, endless conversations, scrolling, relationships, and stimulation, not because these things truly fulfill us, but because silence makes us uneasy. Silence removes distractions, and when distractions disappear, the mind is forced to face itself. This is why solitude feels uncomfortable to many people. When you are alone, there is no audience watching you, no one to impress, no expectations to meet, no image to protect. The masks you wear for the world slowly fall away. And in that quiet space, the mind begins to speak honestly for the first time. In solitude, thoughts rise naturally without being filtered or suppressed. Old memories surface, unresolved emotions appear. Fears you ignored begin to whisper. Attachments you never questioned reveal their hold on you. This process can feel heavy at first, and that is why many people avoid being alone. They mistake discomfort for danger. But Buddhism teaches that this discomfort is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign of awakening. Awareness often begins with unease. When you finally allow yourself to sit quietly, without reaching for your phone, without needing someone's attention, without distracting yourself, you begin to notice how your mind actually works. You see the loops you repeat. You recognize the desires that control you. You understand the emotional habits that shape your reactions. Strong minds are willing to face this truth. They understand that clarity is far more valuable than comfort. Avoiding solitude may feel easier in the moment, but it only postpones growth and deepens confusion. When you give yourself the space to be alone, the mind slowly untangles itself. Thoughts lose their urgency. Emotions soften when they are observed instead of resisted. You begin to realize that many of your worries were fueled by noise, not reality. And as awareness grows, suffering begins to loosen its grip. Not because life suddenly changes, but because your relationship with your own mind transforms. In solitude, you stop running from yourself, and in that stillness, real understanding begins. 2. Depending on others creates invisible chains. Buddhism teaches that attachment is one of the deepest sources of suffering, yet it often hides behind things we call love, friendship, or connection. When your sense of peace depends on how others treat you, respond to you, or remain close to you, your mind slowly loses its freedom. You may not notice it at first, but emotional dependence creates invisible chains. You begin to adjust your behavior so people do not leave. You silence your truth to avoid conflict. You accept less than you deserve because you fear being alone. Over time, this dependence weakens the mind. Your happiness becomes fragile, easily disturbed by distance, silence, or rejection. Strong minds recognize this pattern and choose to break it. Buddhism does not teach isolation or coldness, but it teaches self-reliance of the heart. When you rely on others to complete you, you give them power over your emotional state. A single word can lift you or crush you. A small change in attention can disturb your peace. This is not connection. This is bondage. Walking alone emotionally means learning to meet your own needs first. It means learning how to calm yourself, comfort yourself, and stand steady even when no one is holding you up. When you begin to enjoy your own company, something powerful happens. You stop clinging, you stop chasing, you stop fearing loss. Relationships no longer feel like lifelines but like shared journeys. You can love without grasping and care without control. Buddhism teaches that freedom comes when you stop needing others to be a certain way for you to feel okay. Strong minds walk alone long enough to become whole within themselves. And from that wholeness, they are able to connect more deeply, more honestly, and without fear. 3. Being alone teaches you to observe, not react. Buddhism teaches that the greatest power of the mind is not control, but awareness. Most people live in a constant state of reaction. They react to words, opinions, moods, expectations, and the emotional energy of others without realizing it. When you are always surrounded by people, the mind stays stimulated and triggered. Every interaction pulls you outward. Every conversation invites comparison, defense, or emotional response. This keeps the mind restless and reactive. Solitude removes these external triggers and creates space for observation to develop. When you are alone, emotions still arise, but there is no pressure to act on them. Anger appears, but there is no argument to fuel it. Sadness surfaces, but there is no audience to perform it for. Anxiety comes, but there is no immediate distraction to escape into. In this quiet space, you begin to notice something important. Emotions are not permanent. Thoughts come and go. Sensations rise and fall. Buddhism teaches that suffering grows when we cling to these experiences or resist them. But when you are alone, you can simply watch them. You begin to see how reactions lose their power when they are not fed. Strong minds train themselves in this awareness. They learn to pause instead of reacting, to breathe instead of responding, and to observe instead of identifying with every thought. Over time, this practice creates inner stability. Situations that once triggered you begin to lose their grip. Words that once hurt you no longer control you. This is not because you become numb, but because you become conscious. Solitude teaches you that you are not your emotions, and you are not your thoughts. You are the awareness watching them. And when awareness grows, peace naturally follows. 4. Silence reveals what truly matters. Buddhism teaches that the mind becomes confused not because life is complicated, but because the mind is overcrowded. Too many desires, too many voices, too many expectations, and too many distractions compete for attention at the same time. When life is noisy, the mind cannot hear what is essential. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is clarity. It is only when external noise fades that the inner truth begins to rise. Strong minds understand this deeply. They intentionally step into silence, not to escape life, but to understand it. When you remove constant conversation, entertainment, and stimulation, your priorities slowly begin to shift. At first, silence may feel uncomfortable. The mind looks for something to hold on to. It searches for validation, excitement, or reassurance. But when none is immediately available, awareness deepens. You begin to notice how much of your energy was being spent on things that did not truly nourish you. You see how many conversations were draining instead of meaningful. You recognize how many goals were shaped by comparison rather than inner truth. Buddhism teaches that desire multiplies suffering and silence exposes unnecessary desire clearly. In silence, the mind simplifies. You start valuing peace over approval, presence over productivity, depth over quantity. You realize that many of the things you once chased were responses to emptiness, not expressions of purpose. Silence gently strips away what is excessive and reveals what is essential. Breathing becomes noticeable. Thoughts slow down. Small moments gain importance. A quiet walk feels richer than a crowded gathering. A single sincere connection feels more valuable than many shallow ones. Strong minds do not fear this simplification. They welcome it. They understand that a scattered mind is easily influenced, but a quiet mind becomes unshakable. When silence becomes familiar, you stop reacting to every opinion. You stop chasing every opportunity. You stop measuring your worth by external standards. Buddhism teaches that freedom arises when the mind is no longer pulled in multiple directions. Silence teaches you what deserves your energy and what quietly steals it away. Over time, silence reshapes your decisions. You choose what aligns with your inner peace rather than what impresses others. You speak less, but mean more. You move slower, but with clarity. Life becomes lighter, not because problems disappear, but because you are no longer carrying unnecessary weight. Silence does not remove responsibility. It removes confusion. And in that clarity, strong minds find a steady direction that does not depend on the noise of the world. Silence ultimately teaches one of Buddhism's deepest truths. Happiness is not found by adding more, but by needing less. When the mind understands this, suffering loosens its grip. You stop chasing meaning and start living it. Silence becomes a guide, not a void. And what truly matters finally stands clear, calm, and unmistakable. 5. Loving your own company. Ends the fear of loneliness. Buddhism teaches that loneliness is not created by being alone, it is created by not being at peace with yourself. Many people fear solitude because they believe their worth comes from connection, attention, and presence in other people's lives. When those things disappear, they feel empty, forgotten, or unimportant. This fear pushes people to stay in relationships that drain them, to tolerate noise that exhausts them, and to surround themselves with company even when their heart asks for rest. But Buddhism offers a quiet truth that changes everything. When you learn to love your own company, loneliness dissolves naturally. Loving your own company does not happen overnight. At first, being alone may feel strange. The mind searches for distraction, it replays memories, it questions your value. It tells stories like, "I am missing out," or "something is wrong with me." Buddhism teaches that these thoughts are not truths, they are habits of the mind formed through dependence. When you sit with yourself long enough without running away, these thoughts slowly lose their authority. You begin to notice that peace does not require an audience. Joy does not require validation. Presence does not require permission. As you grow comfortable with your own presence, you begin to enjoy small moments deeply. A quiet morning feels complete. A walk alone feels grounding rather than empty. Silence becomes soothing instead of threatening. This is because you are no longer seeking something outside to complete you. Buddhism teaches that wholeness is already within you, but it is hidden beneath layers of craving and comparison. When those layers fall away, contentment naturally arises. Strong minds understand that loving your own company is not selfish. It is self-respect. When you are at ease with yourself, you stop begging for attention and stop fearing rejection. You no longer chase people to feel alive. You no longer measure your value by how many messages you receive or how often you are included. This inner independence creates emotional stability. Others cannot easily disturb your peace because your peace does not depend on them. Paradoxically, when you stop fearing loneliness, your relationships improve. You choose people because you want to, not because you need to. You can walk away from what harms you without guilt. You can be present with others without losing yourself. Buddhism teaches that attachment weakens love, while freedom strengthens it. When you love your own company, you bring calm, patience, and clarity into every interaction. Over time, this inner comfort becomes a quiet strength. You are no longer afraid of empty rooms or quiet evenings. You are no longer rushed by silence. You trust yourself enough to sit with your thoughts, your emotions, and your imperfections without judgment. This acceptance softens the heart. Compassion for yourself grows, and with it, compassion for others. Buddhism teaches that the end of suffering begins when craving ends. The craving for constant company, constant reassurance, and constant stimulation fades when you realize that being alone is not abandonment. It is an invitation to return to yourself. When you learn to love your own company, loneliness loses its meaning. Solitude becomes a sanctuary, and in that sanctuary, the mind finally rests. 6. Walking alone builds unshakable inner strength. Buddhism teaches that true strength is not loud, aggressive, or dependent on dominance. True strength is quiet, steady, and deeply rooted within the mind. Many people appear strong on the surface because they are surrounded by support, approval, and reassurance. But when these supports disappear, their confidence collapses. This is because their strength was borrowed, not built. Walking alone teaches a different kind of power, a power that does not rely on external validation or constant encouragement. When you begin walking alone, emotionally and mentally, the mind is forced to rely on itself. There is no one to constantly reassure you, no one to immediately comfort you, and no one to make decisions for you. At first, this can feel overwhelming. Doubt arises, fear whispers that you are not capable. But Buddhism teaches that these feelings are part of the training. Just as a muscle grows through resistance, inner strength grows through self-reliance. Each moment you face uncertainty alone and remain present, your confidence deepens naturally. Walking alone teaches you how to endure discomfort without panic. You learn that you do not need immediate solutions to survive. You discover that fear can be felt without obeying it. Sadness can be experienced without drowning in it. This realization is powerful. It builds resilience. Strong minds do not avoid difficulty. They know how to sit with it calmly. Buddhism emphasizes equanimity, the ability to remain balanced regardless of circumstances. Walking alone is one of the most direct paths to developing this balance. As inner strength grows, external situations lose their ability to shake you. Criticism feels lighter, rejection hurts less deeply, uncertainty no longer paralyzes you. This is not because you become detached from life, but because you become anchored within yourself. Your stability no longer depends on others agreeing with you, supporting you, or staying close. You trust your own judgment. You trust your ability to adapt. And this trust becomes your foundation. Strong minds also understand that walking alone sharpens awareness. Without constant influence, your decisions become clearer. You recognize what aligns with your values and what does not. You stop following paths simply because others are walking them. Buddhism teaches that wisdom arises from direct experience, not imitation. Walking alone allows you to experience life honestly, without distortion. Each step strengthens discernment. Over time, this inner strength becomes unshakable. Life's storms may still come, but they no longer uproot you. You bend without breaking. You face challenges without losing yourself. Buddhism teaches that liberation begins when the mind stops depending on conditions to feel secure. Walking alone trains the mind to remain steady in all conditions. In this way, solitude is not a punishment. It is a forge. Each quiet moment strengthens the mind. Each challenge faced alone deepens resilience. And eventually, you realize that you are far stronger than you ever believed. Not because life became easier, but because you became grounded. Walking alone builds a strength that cannot be taken away because it was built within. 7. Solitude is the path to compassion, not isolation. Many people misunderstand walking alone. They believe solitude hardens the heart, makes a person cold, distant, or emotionally detached. Buddhism teaches the opposite. True solitude does not disconnect you from others. It reconnects you to life at a deeper level. Isolation comes from fear, resentment, and emotional withdrawal. Solitude comes from awareness, acceptance, and inner peace. Strong minds learn to walk alone, not because they reject people, but because they refuse to carry inner chaos into their relationships. When you are constantly surrounded by others, your unresolved emotions often spill outward. You expect others to heal you, validate you, or complete you. This creates tension, disappointment, and subtle resentment. Buddhism teaches that suffering multiplies when we project our unmet needs onto others. Solitude removes this projection. When you are alone, there is no one to blame, no one to demand from, and no one to expect rescue from. You are gently brought back to yourself. This return is not selfish, it is necessary. In solitude, you begin to understand your own pain clearly. You see where it comes from, how it formed, and how you unknowingly pass it on. You recognize how impatience, anger, insecurity, and fear were never caused by others, but by your relationship with your own mind. This understanding softens you. Judgment fades. Harshness dissolves. When you truly see your own suffering, compassion naturally arises. Buddhism teaches that compassion is not something you force. It is something that appears when ignorance disappears. Walking alone gives you space to heal quietly. You are no longer performing strength for others. You are no longer hiding wounds behind smiles or distractions. You allow yourself to feel fully without shame. This honesty creates inner warmth. As the heart heals, it becomes more open, not more closed. You stop expecting perfection from others because you no longer demand it from yourself. You stop reacting harshly because you understand how pain behaves. This is the foundation of true compassion. Strong minds understand that compassion begins with non-attachment. When you are no longer dependent on people for emotional survival, you can love them freely. Your kindness is no longer transactional. You do not give to receive. You do not listen to be validated. You do not stay to be needed. You stay because you choose to. Buddhism teaches that love rooted in attachment is unstable, while love rooted in freedom is unshakable. Solitude teaches this freedom slowly and gently. As you grow comfortable walking alone, your presence changes. You listen more deeply. You speak less, but with sincerity. You no longer interrupt others with your own unresolved emotions. You create space instead of pressure. People feel calmer around you without knowing why. This is because you are no longer seeking something from them. You are simply present. Buddhism calls this compassionate presence. Being fully with someone without trying to change them, fix them, or use them to fill an inner void. Solitude also teaches humility. When you walk alone, you realize how similar all human minds are. Fear, desire, confusion, and longing exist in everyone. This realization dissolves superiority. You stop dividing people into strong and weak, successful and failed, enlightened and ignorant. You see that everyone is struggling with their own inner storms. Buddhism teaches that wisdom is seeing yourself in others and others in yourself. Solitude makes this truth visible. Strong minds return to the world after solitude, not as isolated beings, but as grounded ones. They are less reactive, less judgmental, and less demanding. They do not rush intimacy, and they do not fear distance. They allow relationships to breathe. This creates healthier bonds. Conflicts soften, expectations lower, understanding deepens. Solitude refines the heart so that connection becomes lighter and more sincere. Walking alone also teaches compassionate boundaries. Buddhism does not teach unlimited tolerance. It teaches wisdom. When you know yourself deeply, you recognize what harms you and what supports your peace. You can step away without anger. You can say no without guilt. This is compassion for yourself, which is inseparable from compassion for others. Strong minds do not sacrifice their inner balance to prove kindness. They understand that true compassion never requires self-abandonment. Over time, solitude reshapes how you see humanity. You stop reacting to surface behavior and start seeing underlying pain. This does not mean excusing harm, but it means responding with clarity instead of hatred. Buddhism teaches that hatred only creates more suffering. Solitude gives you the inner space to respond wisely. You learn when to engage and when to step back, when to speak and when to remain silent. This discernment is a sign of deep compassion. Ultimately, solitude reveals one of Buddhism's most profound truths. You are never truly alone. When you sit quietly and deeply with yourself, you feel connected to life itself. Breathing becomes shared. Suffering becomes universal. Compassion flows naturally, not because you were taught it, but because you understand it. Walking alone dissolves the illusion of separation. Strong minds walk alone long enough to remember this truth, and when they return to the world, they do not carry isolation. They carry calm. They carry patience. They carry compassion that does not seek recognition. This is the quiet strength of solitude. This is why Buddhism teaches that learning to walk alone is not the end of connection, but the beginning of genuine love. 8. Solitude is where you remember who you truly are. Buddhism teaches that most people do not truly know themselves. They know their roles, their responsibilities, their stories, and the identities they have built over time. But beneath all of that, the true self remains unfamiliar. From a young age, the mind learns to shape itself around expectations. You learn how to be liked, how to belong, how to survive emotionally by adjusting yourself to the world. Over time, this constant adjustment becomes automatic. You forget where adaptation ends and where your true nature begins. Solitude is the space where this forgetting slowly ends. When you walk alone long enough, without distraction and without performance, the layers of identity begin to loosen. You are no longer a son or daughter in that moment, no longer a friend or partner, no longer a role or a title. You are simply awareness breathing in a body. At first, this feels unfamiliar, even unsettling. The mind asks, "Who am I without others?" Buddhism teaches that this question is not meant to be answered with words, it is meant to be experienced in stillness. In solitude, you begin to notice how much of your personality was shaped by reaction. You spoke a certain way because it gained approval. You hid parts of yourself because they were misunderstood. You chased goals not because they aligned with your heart, but because they brought recognition. When these influences disappear, what remains feels quiet and simple. This simplicity is not emptiness. It is clarity returning. Buddhism teaches that the true self is not loud, ambitious, or demanding. It is calm, aware, and present. As solitude deepens, you begin to observe your thoughts without identifying with them. Memories appear, but you are no longer pulled into them. Plans arise, but they do not control you. You start to realize that the mind is not who you are. It is something you experience. This realization is central to Buddhist wisdom. Suffering continues as long as you believe every thought is you. Freedom begins when you see thoughts as passing events. Solitude makes this truth visible because there is nothing competing for your attention. Walking alone also reveals how much of your pain came from misunderstanding yourself. You were never broken. You were overwhelmed. You were never weak. You were overextended. You were never lost. You were simply listening to too many voices that were not your own. In solitude, these voices grow quiet. The inner noise fades, and in that silence you feel something steady and familiar, as if you are remembering something ancient. Buddhism teaches that enlightenment is not becoming something new, but remembering what was always there. As you spend time alone, your nervous system begins to relax. The constant alertness required to navigate social expectations fades. Your breathing deepens. Your movements slow. You feel safer inside your own body. This safety is important because a mind that does not feel safe cannot see clearly. Solitude restores this sense of inner refuge. You begin to trust yourself again, not because you have answers, but because you are no longer running from uncertainty. Strong minds do not walk alone to escape the world. They walk alone to see it clearly. When you are no longer entangled in constant interaction, you begin to notice how life unfolds naturally. A leaf falling becomes meaningful. A breath becomes grounding. A moment of stillness becomes complete. Buddhism teaches that awakening often arrives quietly, not in dramatic moments, but in simple awareness. Solitude allows you to notice these moments. As identity loosens, compassion deepens naturally. You stop defending an image. You stop proving a point. You stop needing to be right. When you no longer cling to who you think you are, you become open to what life is showing you. This openness is wisdom. You respond instead of react. You listen instead of interrupt. You move through life with less friction. Buddhism teaches that suffering decreases when resistance ends. Solitude gently dissolves resistance. Walking alone also changes how you relate to time. When you are no longer rushing to meet expectations, time slows down. You stop living for future validation and start inhabiting the present. Buddhism teaches that the present moment is the only place where peace exists. Solitude trains the mind to stay here, not because it is forced, but because there is nowhere else it needs to be. Over time, you begin to feel whole without effort. This wholeness does not depend on success, recognition, or companionship. It comes from alignment. Your thoughts, actions, and values begin to match. You say no when something disturbs your peace. You say yes when something feels honest. Strong minds are not rigid, they are aligned. Solitude creates this alignment naturally. You also begin to recognize impermanence more clearly. Everything changes, moods pass, people come and go, circumstances shift. Buddhism teaches that clinging to what changes creates suffering. Solitude allows you to observe impermanence without panic. You stop grasping, you stop fearing loss, you begin to trust flow. This trust brings ease. As this understanding deepens, fear of being alone disappears completely. Solitude no longer feels like absence. It feels like presence. You are no longer trying to fill silence. You are resting in it. You are no longer afraid of your thoughts. You are listening to them without obedience. You are no longer chasing identity. You are living awareness. Strong minds reach a point where walking alone feels natural, not lonely, not heavy, simply natural. They have remembered themselves. And once you remember who you are, the world cannot confuse you again. You may still walk with others, laugh with others, love others, but you are no longer lost in them. You remain rooted. Buddhism teaches that liberation is the end of inner conflict. Solitude is not the destination, but it is the doorway. It is the place where the mind stops running and starts seeing, where identity softens and awareness expands, where you stop becoming and start being. When you learn to walk alone in this way, you do not disappear from the world. You return to it quietly transformed, calmer, clearer, kinder. Strong minds do not announce this transformation, they live it, and that silent strength is unmistakable. 9. Solitude teaches you how to live without needing to be seen. Buddhism teaches that much of human suffering comes from the need to be seen, acknowledged, validated, and remembered. From an early age, we learn that attention equals worth. Praise becomes proof of value. Recognition becomes confirmation of existence. Slowly, without noticing, the mind ties its sense of self to how it appears in the eyes of others. This attachment is subtle but powerful. It shapes behavior, choices, speech, and even silence. Solitude is where this attachment begins to loosen. When you walk alone long enough, there is no audience watching your progress, no one applauding your efforts, no one measuring your growth. At first, this can feel unsettling. The mind asks quietly, if no one sees me, do I still matter? Buddhism teaches that this question itself reveals the root of suffering. The need to be seen is not natural. It is conditioned. It is learned through comparison, approval, and fear of invisibility. Solitude gently removes these conditions. In solitude, you continue to exist without feedback. You breathe without being noticed. You think without being validated. You live without being measured. Slowly, the nervous system relaxes. The pressure to perform dissolves. You realize that life does not require an audience to be meaningful. A moment does not lose its value just because no one witnesses it. Buddhism teaches that presence itself is enough. When you see this directly, a deep weight lifts from the mind. Strong minds begin to enjoy living unseen, not because they reject others, but because they are no longer dependent on observation for self-worth. They no longer rush to share every achievement or explain every struggle. They allow experiences to remain internal. This quiet containment builds inner dignity. When you stop narrating your life for others, you start living it for yourself. Buddhism teaches that silence strengthens authenticity. What is real does not need advertisement. As the need to be seen fades, comparison weakens. You stop measuring your progress against others. You stop feeling behind or ahead. You move at your own pace. Buddhism teaches that comparison is a form of ignorance because it assumes separate paths should look the same. Solitude reveals that each path unfolds uniquely. When no one is watching, you stop rushing. When no one is judging, you stop defending. When no one is counting, you stop competing. Walking alone also teaches humility. Without external praise, you confront your motivations honestly. You ask yourself why you do what you do. Is it to impress or is it to align? Is it to be admired or is it to be at peace? Buddhism teaches that actions rooted in ego create suffering, while actions rooted in clarity create freedom. Solitude exposes ego gently, without condemnation. You see it not as an enemy, but as a habit that can be released. Strong minds learn to let good deeds remain quiet. They help without announcing. They improve without broadcasting. They grow without display. This is not secrecy, it is maturity. Buddhism teaches that attachment to image weakens wisdom. When you stop seeking recognition, your actions become purer. You are no longer bargaining with life for approval. You are participating fully without expectation. Solitude also reshapes how you experience success and failure. Success no longer needs to be shared to feel real. Failure no longer feels humiliating when unseen. Both become experiences rather than identities. Buddhism teaches that clinging to either success or failure creates suffering. Solitude allows both to pass quietly. You learn from them without being consumed by them. As this understanding deepens, your sense of self becomes lighter. You stop asking how you appear and start asking how you feel. You stop shaping yourself for perception and start aligning yourself with truth. This alignment brings calm. You no longer carry the tension of being watched. You move freely. Buddhism teaches that freedom arises when the mind stops performing. Walking alone also teaches you how to hold joy privately. Many people feel an urge to share happiness immediately, fearing it will disappear if not acknowledged. Solitude teaches you that joy deepens when it is allowed to settle quietly. You savor moments instead of displaying them. You feel fully instead of documenting. Buddhism teaches that grasping weakens joy, while presence strengthens it. Over time, the fear of invisibility dissolves. You no longer equate being unseen with being unimportant. You understand that existence itself is enough. You are here, you are breathing, you are aware. This is not small. Buddhism teaches that awareness is sacred. When you recognize this, you stop needing proof of worth. Strong minds eventually reach a place where being unseen feels peaceful. There is no pressure to maintain an image, no anxiety about relevance, no fear of fading. You exist deeply, quietly, and fully. You are no longer chasing significance. You are living truth. And truth does not need witnesses. Solitude teaches that life is not a performance. It is an experience. When you live without needing to be seen, you become honest. When you become honest, suffering decreases. This is not withdrawal from life. It is intimacy with life itself. Buddhism teaches that the self we try to protect through image is an illusion. Solitude allows this illusion to soften. You are no longer confined to who you think you are in the eyes of others. You are simply present. And in that presence, there is freedom. Strong minds learn to walk alone until this truth becomes natural. They return to the world without seeking attention, yet their presence is felt, not because they demand it, but because authenticity carries weight. Quiet authenticity always does. 10. Walking alone teaches you to be free without becoming hard. Buddhism teaches that freedom is not the absence of relationships, responsibilities, or connection, but the absence of inner bondage. Many people confuse freedom with isolation, believing that to be free they must detach completely from others or close their hearts. But Buddhism reveals a deeper truth. True freedom is not becoming cold. It is becoming unentangled. Strong minds walk alone not to escape love, but to experience love without chains. Most emotional suffering comes from clinging. We cling to people, roles, identities, outcomes, and expectations because we fear loss. We fear being abandoned. We fear becoming irrelevant. We fear standing alone. This fear slowly hardens the heart. It makes us defensive. It makes us controlling. It makes us demand certainty from an uncertain world. Buddhism teaches that clinging creates tension, and tension creates suffering. Walking alone is the gentle practice of releasing this clinging without bitterness. When you first begin to walk alone, the mind may feel exposed. Without constant interaction, there is nothing to distract you from discomfort. Old wounds surface. Unanswered questions return. The mind asks, "Who am I without attachment?" Buddhism teaches that this discomfort is not a problem to fix, but a doorway to understanding. When you stay present instead of running away, something profound begins to happen. The mind softens. Resistance fades. Fear loses urgency. Walking alone teaches you how to remain open without being dependent. You begin to understand that you can care deeply without clinging. You can love without possession. You can be present without needing control. This is one of Buddhism's most subtle teachings. Attachment is not love. Attachment is fear disguised as connection. Solitude strips away this disguise. When you are alone, love must come from within or not at all. As this understanding deepens, you begin to relate to people differently. You no longer approach them with hunger or expectation. You do not need them to fill silence or affirm identity. You meet them as they are, not as solutions to inner emptiness. Buddhism teaches that when desire fades, compassion rises. You listen without interrupting. You give without keeping score. You allow others to be imperfect without feeling threatened. Strong minds learn that walking alone does not mean closing the heart. It means opening the heart without armor. When you are no longer afraid of solitude, you are no longer afraid of loss. This fearlessness allows genuine warmth to emerge. You stop protecting yourself from imagined abandonment. You stop building walls around vulnerability. You trust life enough to remain open. Walking alone also teaches emotional honesty. Without an audience, you stop pretending strength. You stop exaggerating happiness. You stop hiding sadness. Buddhism teaches that suffering increases when emotions are suppressed or performed. Solitude allows emotions to be felt naturally, without judgment. You cry without shame. You rest without guilt. You heal without explanation. This honesty creates emotional balance. As the mind stabilizes, you begin to notice a quiet confidence forming, not confidence based on achievement or recognition, but confidence rooted in self-trust. You trust your ability to endure uncertainty. You trust your ability to adapt. You trust your ability to stand without support. This trust is unshakable because it is built through direct experience. Buddhism teaches that wisdom comes from seeing for yourself, not believing others. Walking alone teaches you how to respond instead of react. When life challenges you, you no longer collapse inward or lash outward. You pause, you observe, you choose. This space between stimulus and response is freedom. Buddhism emphasizes mindfulness because it creates this space. Solitude strengthens mindfulness naturally. With fewer distractions, awareness sharpens. Over time, walking alone dissolves the fear of abandonment completely. You realize that nothing essential can leave you. People may come and go, circumstances may change, roles may dissolve, but awareness remains. Presence remains. Life remains. Buddhism teaches that clinging to impermanent things creates suffering. Solitude allows you to experience impermanence without panic. You let go without despair. Strong minds also learn to forgive through solitude. Not forced forgiveness, but understanding-based forgiveness. You see how fear drives harmful behavior. You recognize ignorance in yourself and others. This recognition softens resentment. Buddhism teaches that hatred binds the mind, while understanding frees it. Solitude provides the clarity needed for this understanding. Walking alone teaches humility as well. Without comparison, superiority fades. You stop measuring yourself against others. You see how fragile and human everyone is. This realization dissolves pride and shame equally. Buddhism teaches the middle way, neither elevating nor diminishing the self. Solitude reveals this balance. As inner freedom grows, you stop seeking certainty. You stop demanding guarantees from life. You accept uncertainty as part of existence. This acceptance brings peace. Buddhism teaches that craving certainty in an impermanent world is a source of suffering. Walking alone trains the mind to rest without answers. Eventually, walking alone becomes less about solitude and more about presence. You can be with others without losing yourself. You can be alone without feeling empty. You move through life grounded. You are no longer divided between inner and outer worlds. There is alignment. Thought, action, and intention move together. Strong minds reach a point where they do not need to define themselves. They do not need labels. They do not need stories. They are comfortable not knowing exactly who they are. Buddhism teaches that clinging to identity is another form of attachment. Solitude allows identity to loosen gently. You become flexible, responsive, alive. Walking alone teaches you to live without resistance. You stop fighting what is. You stop arguing with reality. You adapt without bitterness. This acceptance does not make you passive, it makes you wise. Buddhism teaches that wisdom is seeing things as they are, not as you wish them to be. In this freedom, compassion becomes effortless. You no longer act kindly to be good. You act kindly because you understand suffering. You see yourself in others. You see others in yourself. Solitude dissolves separation. The illusion of me versus the world fades. What remains is connection without attachment. Strong minds walk alone until they realize they were never truly alone. Awareness was always present. Life was always flowing through them. Others were companions, not supports. This realization ends fear. You move through life lightly, without gripping. Buddhism teaches that liberation is the end of clinging. Walking alone is one of the most direct paths to this liberation. It teaches you how to be free without becoming hard, open without becoming dependent, and connected without becoming lost. When you reach this understanding, walking alone no longer feels like a phase. It becomes a way of being. You walk with others when paths align. You walk alone when they do not. And in both, you remain at peace. This is the quiet strength of the awakened mind. 11. Walking alone teaches you how to rest in life without escaping it. Buddhism teaches that most people are not truly living, they are constantly escaping. Escaping discomfort, escaping uncertainty, escaping silence, escaping themselves. Even when surrounded by people, noise, and activity, the mind is often running from what it feels. This running becomes so habitual that stillness feels threatening. Walking alone interrupts this pattern. It removes the usual exits. It gently corners the mind, not to punish it, but to teach it how to stay. When you walk alone long enough, you begin to notice how often the mind wants to flee the present moment. It jumps to the future for hope or returns to the past for identity. It clings to plans, memories and stories because being fully here feels unfamiliar. Buddhism teaches that suffering is born from this resistance to the present. Solitude exposes this resistance clearly. There is nowhere else to go but now. At first, resting in the present feels restless. The mind looks for stimulation. It wants something to happen. It wants meaning, reassurance, direction. But walking alone teaches patience. You learn to remain without forcing movement. You learn to sit with boredom without labeling it as failure. You learn to stay with uncertainty without demanding answers. Buddhism teaches that peace is not found by escaping discomfort, but by understanding it. As you continue walking alone, something subtle shifts. The urge to escape weakens. The mind begins to settle naturally, like muddy water clearing when left undisturbed. You realize that many of your struggles were intensified by resistance. When you stop fighting experience softens. Thoughts come, but they no longer demand action. Emotions arise, but they no longer define you. You are learning how to rest within life instead of running from it. Walking alone also reveals how much of your identity was built around movement. Doing, achieving, fixing, improving, proving. When these movements slow, the mind asks, "Who am I if I am not becoming?" Buddhism teaches that this question points directly to awakening. You begin to sense that your worth was never dependent on motion. You are allowed to exist without striving. You are allowed to rest without guilt. Strong minds learn that rest is not laziness. It is integration. Without rest, experiences remain fragmented. Lessons remain incomplete. Walking alone gives the mind time to digest life, to absorb understanding, to heal quietly. Buddhism emphasizes mindfulness because it allows experience to complete itself. Solitude naturally cultivates this mindfulness. As you rest more deeply, you begin to trust life again. You stop trying to control outcomes. You stop rehearsing futures. You stop bracing for disappointment. This does not mean you become careless. It means you become present. Buddhism teaches that control is an illusion born from fear. When you see this clearly, the grip loosens. You act when action is needed. You wait when waiting is needed. There is no urgency to escape. Walking alone also teaches emotional spaciousness. When you are no longer constantly engaged with others, emotions have room to breathe. You notice that sadness does not overwhelm when it is allowed. Fear does not dominate when it is observed. Joy deepens when it is not rushed. Buddhism teaches that emotions become suffering only when resisted or clung to. Solitude provides the space where emotions can move freely. Strong minds begin to experience a quiet contentment that does not depend on conditions. This contentment is not excitement or pleasure. It is ease, a feeling that nothing is missing in this moment. Buddhism teaches that craving is the belief that something essential is absent. Walking alone reveals that this belief is false. You are already here, breathing, aware, alive. This is enough. As this understanding deepens, the mind stops asking life to be different. You no longer wait for circumstances to improve before allowing peace. You no longer postpone happiness until goals are reached. You realize that peace was never at the end of a journey. It was always available in presence. Walking alone trains the mind to recognize this availability. Walking alone also softens the fear of stillness. Many people fear quiet because it feels like emptiness. Buddhism teaches that emptiness is not nothingness, it is openness. When you rest in stillness, you feel this openness directly. There is room for everything without conflict. Thoughts arise and dissolve. Sensations appear and fade. Life moves through you without obstruction. Strong minds stop filling silence compulsively. They stop needing constant stimulation. They stop fearing pauses in conversation and gaps in activity. These pauses become nourishing. Buddhism teaches that wisdom often arises in silence, not in noise. Walking alone allows you to hear this wisdom. As you become comfortable resting in life, urgency disappears. You stop rushing growth. You stop forcing change. You trust that understanding unfolds naturally when conditions are present. Buddhism teaches that forcing awakening only creates tension. Walking alone cultivates patience, which allows insight to arise organically. You also begin to notice how life supports itself. Breathing happens without effort. The heart beats without instruction. Nature unfolds without struggle. This observation creates humility. You realize that you are part of a larger flow. You do not need to manage everything. Buddhism teaches that letting go is aligning with this flow. Walking alone teaches surrender without defeat. You are not giving up on life. You are releasing the need to dominate it. This surrender brings relief. The body relaxes. The mind quiets. You stop bracing for impact. You start trusting experience. Strong minds eventually reach a point where they can be with anything. Pleasure without attachment. Pain without resistance. Silence without fear, company without dependence, solitude without loneliness. This flexibility is freedom. Buddhism teaches that liberation is the ability to remain present regardless of conditions. Walking alone is training for this liberation. As you rest more deeply in life, compassion becomes effortless. You no longer judge others for escaping because you recognize the fear beneath it. You no longer demand clarity from confused minds. You allow others their process. This patience is born from self-understanding. Buddhism teaches that understanding yourself deeply leads to understanding others naturally. Walking alone teaches you that life does not need to be solved. It needs to be lived. When you stop trying to escape the present reveals its quiet richness. You begin to notice beauty without searching, meaning without effort, peace without conditions. Strong minds rest in this simplicity. They no longer need to chase fulfillment or avoid discomfort. They meet life as it is, fully, gently, honestly. This is not indifference, it is intimacy. Buddhism teaches that awakening is not an extraordinary state. It is the end of unnecessary struggle. Walking alone leads you here slowly, patiently, without force. You learn to stay, to breathe, to be. 12. Walking alone teaches you that you were never missing anything. Buddhism teaches that much of human suffering is built on a single misunderstanding, the belief that something essential is missing. From childhood, the mind is trained to feel incomplete. Incomplete without approval. Incomplete without success. Incomplete without love, recognition, direction, or belonging. This belief becomes so deeply rooted that it feels natural. Life turns into a search for people who will complete us, a search for achievements that will validate us, a search for meaning that seems always just out of reach. Walking alone slowly dismantles this illusion. When you begin walking alone, the mind initially feels exposed. Without constant interaction, distraction, or reassurance, the sense of lack becomes louder. The mind whispers that you are falling behind, being forgotten, or missing out. Buddhism teaches that this voice is not wisdom, it is conditioning. It is the echo of years spent believing that worth must be earned and fulfillment must be acquired. Solitude does not create this voice. It reveals it. And what can be seen clearly can be understood. What can be understood can be released. As solitude deepens, you begin to notice something unexpected. Even when nothing new is added to your life, you are still breathing, still aware, still here. Moments pass, and you remain. This simple continuity begins to weaken the belief that something essential is absent. You start to recognize that life is happening fully, even without external reinforcement. Buddhism teaches that presence itself is completeness. Awareness does not need improvement, it only needs recognition. Walking alone teaches you to feel your own existence directly, without explanation. You wake up, you breathe, you notice sensations, thoughts, emotions, and silence. None of this requires permission. None of this requires achievement. You realize that being alive is not a reward, it is a fact. This realization is quiet but profound. When the mind stops demanding proof of worth, it relaxes. The constant tension of becoming softens. Strong minds eventually see that the search for completion was never about gaining something new. It was about misunderstanding what was already here. Buddhism teaches that craving arises from ignorance. We crave because we do not see clearly. We seek because we believe fulfillment exists elsewhere. Walking alone removes the distractions that maintain this belief. Without noise, the mind begins to see that peace was never missing. It was simply obscured by effort. As this understanding settles, the urge to chase fades naturally. You stop trying to impress the future. You stop bargaining with life. You stop postponing peace until conditions improve. Buddhism teaches that liberation is the end of unnecessary seeking. Walking alone does not give you answers. It dissolves the questions that were never needed. You also begin to see how much suffering came from comparison. When you are constantly around others, the mind measures itself unconsciously. Who is ahead? Who is behind? Who is admired? Who is overlooked? Walking alone interrupts this comparison. Without reference points, you stop ranking your life. You experience it directly. Buddhism teaches that comparison is a thief of peace because it turns unique paths into competitions. Solitude restores dignity to your individual unfolding. Strong minds realize that nothing needs to be proven. Your existence does not require justification. You do not need to explain your pace, your choices, or your solitude. Walking alone gives you permission to be without apology. Buddhism teaches that self-acceptance is not indulgence. It is clarity. When you stop arguing with your own existence, inner conflict ends. As this acceptance deepens, fear loosens. Fear of being left behind, fear of not becoming enough, fear of not mattering. You see that these fears were fueled by the belief of lack. When the belief dissolves, fear loses its foundation. Buddhism teaches that fear is the child of ignorance. When understanding arises, fear fades quietly. Walking alone also teaches gratitude without effort. Not gratitude as a practice or discipline, but gratitude as a natural response to seeing clearly. You notice the simplicity of breathing, the reliability of the body, the quiet intelligence of awareness. You realize that life has been supporting you all along, even when you were searching for something else. Buddhism teaches that appreciation arises naturally when craving ends. Strong minds begin to live lightly. They no longer carry the burden of expectation. They do not need life to be extraordinary to feel content. Ordinary moments become complete. A quiet meal, a slow walk, a silent morning. Nothing needs to be added. Nothing needs to be removed. This simplicity is freedom. Walking alone also reshapes how you understand purpose. Purpose no longer feels like a destination you must reach to justify your existence. It becomes an expression of presence. You do what feels aligned. You stop forcing direction. Buddhism teaches that right action arises from right understanding, not pressure. When the mind is no longer searching, action becomes natural. As this clarity stabilizes, you stop asking life to make sense. You stop demanding certainty. You allow mystery to exist without anxiety. Buddhism teaches that clinging to explanation is another form of attachment. Walking alone teaches comfort with not knowing. This comfort brings peace. Strong minds realize that they were never broken, never incomplete, never behind. They were simply conditioned to believe that wholeness must be earned. Solitude dissolves this conditioning gently. You see yourself not as a project to fix, but as a life unfolding. Walking alone teaches you that fulfillment is not an achievement. It is recognition. Recognition that you are already part of life, not separate from it. You stop searching for belonging because you realize you were never excluded. Buddhism teaches that separation is an illusion created by the thinking mind. Solitude reveals this illusion clearly. As this realization deepens, compassion becomes effortless. When you see that you were never lacking, you understand why others search. You no longer judge their striving. You recognize it as confusion, not failure. Buddhism teaches that compassion arises from understanding, not moral effort. Strong minds carry this understanding quietly. They do not preach it. They do not display it. They live it. Their presence feels calm because they are no longer trying to get somewhere. They are already here. Walking alone ultimately teaches you the most liberating truth of all. You were never missing anything. Life was never withholding. Peace was never distant. You were always enough, not because of what you became, but because of what you are. 13. Walking alone teaches you how to belong to life without losing yourself. Buddhism teaches that one of the most painful struggles of the human mind is the tension between belonging and losing oneself. From a young age, we are taught that to belong we must adjust, compromise, and reshape ourselves. We learn to soften our truth, silence our instincts, and hide parts of our inner world so we can fit into relationships, families, communities, and expectations. Over time, this adjustment becomes automatic. We stop noticing when we are abandoning ourselves. We only notice the exhaustion that follows. Walking alone brings this pattern into awareness. When you begin walking alone, the mind initially feels disconnected. Without the familiar sense of belonging, there is an emptiness that arises. The mind interprets this emptiness as failure, loneliness, or rejection. Buddhism teaches that this emptiness is not loss, it is space. It is the space where false belonging dissolves so real belonging can emerge. Solitude strips away the need to constantly adapt yourself for acceptance. In this space, you begin to feel what it is like to exist without performance. As solitude deepens, you start to recognize how much of your identity was shaped by fear of exclusion. You spoke in ways that felt safer rather than truer. You agreed when your heart disagreed. You stayed quiet when your inner wisdom asked you to speak. Buddhism teaches that suffering grows when we live out of alignment with ourselves. Walking alone reveals this misalignment gently. There is no one to conform to, no one to please, no one to become for the sake of belonging. In this freedom, something subtle happens. You begin to feel a different kind of connection. Not connection based on similarity, approval, or shared identity, but connection rooted in presence. You notice that you belong to the breath you share with all living beings. You belong to the earth beneath your feet. You belong to the rhythm of life itself. Buddhism teaches that true belonging is not social, it is existential. You do not belong because you fit in. You belong because you exist. Walking alone teaches you how to be with others without disappearing into them. When you are no longer afraid of solitude, you no longer cling to company. You can listen without losing your center. You can care without sacrificing your truth. You can love without dissolving into expectation. This balance is rare, but it is the mark of a mature mind. Buddhism calls this the middle way, the ability to engage without attachment and withdraw without aversion. Strong minds learn that belonging does not require agreement. You can stand in your own understanding while respecting others. You can walk a different path without feeling superior or inferior. Walking alone strengthens this inner grounding. You stop defining yourself through opposition or alignment. You simply are. Buddhism teaches that identity hardens when we cling to labels. Solitude softens identity so wisdom can flow. As this understanding grows, fear of rejection loses its power. When you know you belong to life itself, social exclusion no longer threatens your sense of worth. You stop shrinking yourself to remain included. You stop tolerating what harms you to avoid being alone. Buddhism teaches that self-respect is inseparable from wisdom. Walking alone cultivates this respect naturally. You also begin to notice how true belonging feels different from attachment. Attachment feels tense, it requires effort, it fears loss. Belonging feels relaxed, it does not demand proof, it does not fear distance. Solitude teaches you to feel this difference clearly. When you return to relationships, you can sense which connections honor your wholeness and which quietly ask you to abandon yourself. Walking alone also teaches you how to carry solitude within you. Even in crowds, even in conversation, even in responsibility, there is a quiet center that remains untouched. You are not pulled apart by noise. You are not lost in roles. Buddhism teaches that this inner refuge is always available. Solitude is not a place you go. It is a way of being present. Strong minds eventually realize that they no longer need to choose between connection and authenticity. They can have both. They can engage deeply without becoming dependent. They can withdraw without resentment. This flexibility is freedom. Buddhism teaches that rigidity is suffering. Walking alone dissolves rigidity. As this inner belonging stabilizes, compassion deepens naturally. When you no longer need others to confirm your worth, you stop using them as mirrors. You see them more clearly. You listen without defensiveness. You respond without agenda. This clarity creates genuine connection. Buddhism teaches that true relationship begins when the self is no longer central. Walking alone also heals the wound of not being understood. Many people carry quiet pain from feeling unseen or misunderstood. Solitude teaches you that being understood by others is not essential when you understand yourself. This self-understanding is not intellectual, it is lived. You feel aligned, you feel settled, you stop needing explanation. Buddhism teaches that peace arises when inner conflict ends, not when outer agreement is achieved. Strong minds learn to let people come and go without interpreting it as personal failure. Relationships change, paths diverge, seasons end. Walking alone teaches acceptance of impermanence without bitterness. Buddhism teaches that clinging to what changes creates suffering. Solitude trains the heart to let go gracefully. As you continue walking alone, you begin to feel a deep sense of home. Not a physical place, not a group, not an identity, but a feeling of being rooted in awareness. Wherever you go, this home comes with you. Buddhism teaches that this inner home is the end of seeking. When you find it, you stop wandering emotionally. Walking alone also reveals that belonging to life does not require certainty. You do not need to know exactly where you are going to feel secure. You trust unfolding. You trust process. Buddhism teaches that trust replaces control when understanding deepens. Solitude cultivates this trust slowly and gently. Strong minds reach a point where they no longer introduce themselves through stories. They do not need to summarize who they are. They let presence speak. This presence is calm, grounded, and open. People feel it without explanation. This is belonging without effort. Walking alone teaches you how to stand in your truth without forcing it on others. You stop needing agreement. You stop seeking validation. You stop defending your path. Buddhism teaches that truth does not argue. It rests. Solitude strengthens this resting. Ultimately, walking alone teaches you that you never needed to lose yourself to belong. You only needed to remember that you belong to life itself. When this remembrance settles, you move through the world freely. You connect without fear. You stand alone without loneliness. You belong everywhere because you are nowhere divided. 14. Walking alone teaches you how to be at peace with not becoming anything. Buddhism teaches that one of the deepest sources of suffering is the constant pressure to become someone. From early life, the mind is taught that value lies in progress, improvement, and achievement. You must become successful. You must become respected. You must become wiser, calmer, stronger, more spiritual, more complete. This endless becoming creates tension. No matter how far you go, there is always another version of yourself waiting to be reached. Walking alone slowly dissolves this pressure. When you walk alone long enough, without external expectations shaping your direction, the urge to constantly improve begins to soften. At first, the mind resists. It feels uncomfortable not striving. It worries that stopping means falling behind. Buddhism teaches that this worry is rooted in misunderstanding. Growth does not come from force, it comes from clarity. Solitude removes the noise that confuses growth with effort. As solitude deepens, you begin to notice how much of your striving was fueled by comparison. You wanted to be ahead, admired, or validated. Without constant exposure to others' progress, this comparison fades. The mind stops measuring itself. You begin to feel your own pace. Buddhism teaches that each being unfolds according to its conditions. Forcing yourself to match another rhythm creates suffering. Walking alone restores your natural tempo. Strong minds eventually reach a point where they stop chasing an ideal version of themselves. They stop asking who they should become. They start asking how they can be present. This shift is subtle but profound. Instead of living toward the future, you live into the moment. Buddhism teaches that the future is a concept, while the present is real. Walking alone trains the mind to rest where life actually happens. As the pressure to become fades, a surprising sense of relief appears. You realize that you are allowed to exist as you are, without constantly upgrading yourself. This does not mean stagnation, it means acceptance. Buddhism teaches that acceptance is not resignation, it is the foundation of wisdom. When you stop rejecting yourself, change becomes gentle and natural rather than forced. Walking alone also reveals how identity was built around becoming. You defined yourself by goals, achievements, and potential. When these dissolve, the mind asks, "Who am I now?" Buddhism teaches that this question points beyond identity. You are not who you will become. You are not who you were. You are awareness experiencing change. Solitude allows this truth to be felt directly, not understood intellectually. Strong minds learn to be comfortable with not knowing who they are becoming. They stop demanding a clear narrative for their lives. They allow uncertainty to exist without anxiety. Buddhism teaches that clinging to certainty in an impermanent world creates suffering. Walking alone trains the mind to remain open, flexible, and present. As this openness grows, ambition transforms. You still act, but without desperation. You still move forward, but without tension. Your actions come from alignment rather than insecurity. Buddhism teaches that right action arises from right understanding. When you stop trying to prove your worth through becoming, your actions become more authentic. Walking alone also dissolves spiritual ambition. Many people turn spirituality into another form of becoming. Becoming enlightened, becoming pure, becoming advanced. Buddhism warns against this subtle trap. Awakening is not an achievement. It is the end of grasping. Solitude reveals this clearly. When you stop trying to become awakened, awareness naturally deepens. Strong minds learn to sit with simplicity, a quiet breath, a still moment, a passing thought. Nothing needs to be added, nothing needs to be removed. Buddhism teaches that peace is found not by accumulation, but by subtraction. Walking alone subtracts unnecessary striving. As the mind settles, fear of failure disappears. If you are no longer trying to become something, you cannot fail. You experience life as it unfolds. Success and failure lose their emotional charge. They become events rather than judgments. Buddhism teaches that equanimity arises when the mind stops labeling experience as good or bad. Solitude cultivates this balance naturally. Walking alone teaches you how to rest without guilt. Many people feel uneasy when not improving or producing. Solitude reveals that rest is not wasted time. It is integration. It allows understanding to settle. Buddhism teaches that wisdom matures in stillness. Without stillness, insight remains shallow. Strong minds eventually trust life enough to stop controlling it. They stop pushing toward imagined destinations. They allow unfolding. This trust is not passive, it is responsive. You act when action arises. You rest when rest arises. Buddhism teaches that harmony comes from moving with conditions rather than against them. As the need to become fades, compassion deepens. You stop judging others for where they are on their path. You no longer measure spiritual progress. You understand that everyone is unfolding according to their conditions. Buddhism teaches that compassion arises when comparison ends. Walking alone ends comparison gently. Walking alone also teaches humility. When you stop striving to become exceptional, you stop separating yourself from others. You recognize shared humanity. Fear, desire, confusion, and hope exist in all minds. This recognition dissolves arrogance and shame alike. Buddhism teaches the middle way between pride and self-rejection. Solitude reveals this balance. Strong minds reach a point where they no longer narrate their journey. They stop explaining who they are becoming. They stop seeking acknowledgement for growth. They live quietly. Their presence reflects ease rather than effort. Buddhism teaches that what is real does not need to announce itself. As you walk alone further, you realize that becoming was never the goal. Being was always enough. You stop chasing transformation. You start inhabiting awareness. Life becomes simpler, not because it is reduced, but because resistance ends. Walking alone teaches you to let go of the future without fear. You no longer demand that life turn out a certain way. You trust unfolding. Buddhism teaches that suffering comes from attachment to outcomes. Solitude loosens this attachment naturally. Strong minds learn to be at peace with not becoming anything special. They are content being present. This contentment is not dull, it is alive. It allows curiosity, creativity, and compassion to arise without pressure. Buddhism teaches that freedom is not becoming extraordinary, but ending inner conflict. Ultimately, walking alone reveals that the self you were trying to become was an idea. Awareness was always here. When you stop chasing identity, you rest in presence. This rest is liberation. Walking alone does not lead you to a final version of yourself. It leads you to the end of needing one. And in that ending, there is peace. 15. Walking alone teaches you how to live without carrying the weight of the world. Buddhism teaches that much of human exhaustion does not come from effort, but from unnecessary weight carried inside the mind. The weight of expectations. The weight of responsibility for other people's emotions. The weight of needing to be understood, approved of, admired, or validated. Over time, this invisible burden becomes so familiar that it feels normal. People call it adulthood, duty, or maturity, but in truth, it is a form of silent suffering. Walking alone gently teaches the mind how to set this weight down. When you begin walking alone, the first thing you notice is how tired you are, not physically, but emotionally. You realize how much energy was spent managing impressions, anticipating reactions, and carrying concerns that were never truly yours. Buddhism teaches that compassion does not mean carrying everyone else's suffering. It means understanding suffering without absorbing it. Solitude creates the space where this distinction becomes clear. In solitude, there is no one demanding explanations. No one projecting expectations onto you, no one silently asking you to be more, give more, or become something else. At first, this absence feels strange. The mind is accustomed to pressure. It confuses pressure with purpose. But as the days of walking alone continue, the nervous system begins to unwind. You breathe deeper. You think slower. You move with less urgency. Buddhism teaches that when pressure fades, wisdom surfaces. Walking alone teaches you how much of your life was lived in reaction to imagined responsibility. You believed it was your job to fix others, carry their disappointment, and manage their emotions. Solitude reveals that this belief was never true. You can care without control. You can support without sacrifice. You can love without losing yourself. Buddhism teaches that attachment to responsibility is still attachment. Walking alone loosens this attachment gently. As this understanding deepens, guilt begins to dissolve. Guilt for resting, guilt for saying no, guilt for choosing yourself. You realize that guilt was often a signal of conditioning, not wrongdoing. Buddhism teaches that wise action arises from clarity, not self-punishment. Solitude creates the clarity needed to act without guilt. Strong minds learn to distinguish between what is theirs to carry and what is not. They stop absorbing emotional weight that does not belong to them. This does not make them uncaring. It makes them balanced. Buddhism teaches that balance is the foundation of compassion. Without balance, compassion turns into burnout. Walking alone restores this balance. As you continue walking alone, you also notice how much of your mental energy was spent anticipating outcomes, worrying about how things might unfold, preparing for disappointment, bracing for rejection. Buddhism teaches that this anticipation is a form of suffering experienced in advance. Solitude teaches you how to release this habit. You stop rehearsing futures. You meet life as it arrives. Walking alone also teaches you how to be responsible without being burdened. You still fulfill duties, but without resentment. You still care, but without self-neglect. Buddhism teaches that right effort is effort without tension. Solitude trains the mind to recognize tension and release it. Strong minds eventually realize that they do not need to carry the world to be worthy. They do not need to suffer to prove depth. They do not need to exhaust themselves to demonstrate love. Walking alone dismantles these false equations. You learn that peace is not earned through pain. It is revealed through understanding. As the inner weight drops away, joy begins to appear quietly. Not excitement or pleasure, but lightness, a sense of ease. You laugh more freely. You listen without strain. You move through life with less resistance. Buddhism teaches that joy arises naturally when suffering ends. Solitude removes the causes of suffering one by one. Walking alone also teaches you how to let others carry their own lives. This is one of the hardest lessons. You realize that stepping back does not mean abandoning, it means trusting. Buddhism teaches that each being must walk their own path. Carrying others prevents them from learning. Solitude gives you the courage to allow this. Strong minds learn to accept limits. They stop trying to be everything to everyone. They stop overextending. They respect their energy. Buddhism teaches that wisdom knows when to act and when to rest. Walking alone strengthens this discernment. As this discernment grows, resentment fades. You are no longer angry at people for expecting too much because you no longer agree to carry it. You are no longer frustrated with life for being heavy because you have stopped adding unnecessary weight. Buddhism teaches that much of suffering is self-created through unconscious agreement. Solitude makes this visible. Walking alone teaches you how to stand in your own life without apology. You stop explaining your boundaries. You stop justifying your need for space. You stop defending your quiet. Buddhism teaches that what is aligned does not require defense. Walking alone aligns you with yourself. Strong minds eventually feel a deep sense of relief, not relief from problems disappearing, but relief from struggling against them. You face challenges without panic. You respond without collapse. You trust your capacity. Buddhism teaches that trust replaces fear when understanding deepens. Walking alone also reveals how simple life can be when unnecessary weight is removed. You need less approval, less certainty, less reassurance, less explanation. You find satisfaction in simplicity. Buddhism teaches that craving multiplies suffering, while simplicity dissolves it. Solitude simplifies the mind naturally. As you continue, you realize that walking alone does not isolate you from the world. It allows you to meet the world honestly, without pretense, without exhaustion, without burden. You engage from strength, not depletion. Buddhism teaches that true generosity comes from fullness, not sacrifice. Strong minds carry this lightness into every interaction. They do not impose, they do not cling, they do not withdraw. They are present without pressure. This presence feels safe to others because it is not demanding. Walking alone cultivates this safety. Eventually you understand that the world was never asking you to carry it. That belief came from fear, conditioning, and misunderstanding. Buddhism teaches that suffering ends when misunderstanding ends. Walking alone dissolves misunderstanding gently. Walking alone teaches you how to live without carrying the weight of the world, while still living fully within it. You act where you can. You release what you cannot control. You rest when rest is needed. You move when movement is needed. There is no struggle in this flow. This is not withdrawal, it is wisdom. This is not detachment, it is balance. This is not loneliness, it is freedom. And when this freedom settles, walking alone is no longer something you do. It is simply how you live. Walking alone is not a rejection of life, and it is not a punishment you endure when things fall apart. It is a return to yourself, a return to clarity, a return to the quiet truth that was always there beneath the noise. Buddhism teaches that the path is not about escaping the world, but about seeing it clearly, and clarity is born in stillness. When you learn to walk alone, you stop outsourcing your peace. You stop asking others to define your worth, your direction, or your identity. You realize that approval was never nourishment, and constant company was never connection. You were not weak for needing others. You were simply unaware of your own inner strength. Solitude makes you aware. Along this path, you learn to sit with discomfort instead of running from it. You learn to observe your thoughts without obeying them. You learn to feel emotions without being consumed by them. Slowly, gently, the mind settles. The heart softens. And the endless search for something more comes to rest. Not because life gave you everything, but because you finally stopped believing something was missing. Walking alone teaches you balance. You learn how to care without clinging, love without losing yourself, and connect without dependence. You learn how to stand firm without becoming rigid and open without becoming fragile. This is the middle way Buddha spoke of. Not isolation, not attachment, but freedom. You also discover that strength does not announce itself. It moves quietly, it listens deeply, it chooses carefully. Strong minds do not need to prove their independence or explain their silence. Their presence carries weight because it is rooted in understanding, not ego. When you reach this understanding, loneliness loses its meaning. Silence becomes a companion. Stillness becomes a refuge. You realize that being alone was never the problem. Being disconnected from yourself was. And now that disconnection has ended. You may still walk with others. You may still love deeply. You may still build, create, and engage with the world, but you will no longer disappear into it. You remain centered, grounded, whole. Walking alone is no longer something you practice. It becomes something you embody. Buddhism teaches that liberation is not becoming someone new. It is remembering who you were before fear, comparison, and craving took over. And when you remember, the path ends where it always began, right here, in quiet awareness. This is the strength of walking alone. This is the peace of loving your own company. This is the freedom of a mind that no longer needs to run. And once you reach this place, you will understand why the strongest minds are never afraid to walk alone.